Hey everyone, and welcome to our March webinar. In today's webinar, we are going to explore one of our more advanced features, and that's access rules. Access rules in Grist allow you to control who can view, edit, or modify just specific parts of a document. Owners can create detailed rules to limit access at the table, column, and row level, ensuring users only see or change what's necessary. Now, I already have my document set up in Grist, so we are going to focus solely on setting up access rules, but we will review the document so we can understand the example before we really dive in. We have a payroll document here for an outdoor retailer named Ruffin It Outfitters. There are multiple stores in different regions, and this document tracks payroll for retail employees across all regions. What we're looking at now is the people table. This is contact information for each employee. We have this role column that specifies what their role is in the organization: associate, supervisor, manager. We also have district managers down here at the bottom, as well as director of operations. We have location information. The region assignment, this assigns our district managers to regions. And then we have a store region, which is just a formula column that's pulling the region for the assigned location. And that's going to help us later in our access rules. We have a locations table, which is location specific information. A regions table, this just assigns a district manager to a region. And then we've got this locations list, so we know what locations are within that region. This is our rates table. Employee rates do change over time. Here we see Patty Cabbage has a $13 hourly rate from 2024, and this year in 2025 is $14. We need to capture this so that the historical payroll data remains unchanged if an employee's rate changes. We aren't going to talk about that today, but that is why this table exists. This is our payroll table, where an employee logs their hours for each day worked. We have this per hour column. This is what's using that rate, and it's trying to find the current, it is finding the current rate to calculate accurate payment information. Again, we're not going to go over this today, but we actually walked through how to build the payroll template, which this is based off of, in a previous webinar. These two are nearly exact, the payroll template and then this example. This example just uses multiple locations. There's a question about the region tab. You wrapped the text in a cell. That was probably the other one on the people table. You can wrap text by clicking this button here. And so if I shrink this up, items will move to a new line. So we just discussed payroll. We have this payroll overview page. It's just an overview of payroll data showing how many hours worked each month in each location by each employee. And then a location overview, which just shows a location. You can see the employees in that location. When you select a person, then you can see their rates. But general thing you need to know here, we have employees working at retail locations, various retail locations. We have district managers who probably need to see information on multiple stores. And then we have our director of operations who needs to see everything. And that's how we're going to set up our access rules. Access rules can be accessed from the tools menu in the left-hand navigation panel over here, bottom left-hand corner. So we can click access rules, and that brings us to this page. All you see to start are default rules. Default rules are the rules that apply to our document by default. These rules say in summary that owners and editors, that's what we see in this first condition, they can do anything. They can read, update, create, records and delete records. And we've got the viewers here in the next line, and they have read-only access. And then everyone else is denied all permissions. You might be asking, how do I know who is an owner, an editor, or a viewer? This is actually the access level that is assigned under the Manage Users menu. So if you click Share and then Manage Users, you have this drop down here, and that's the access level we're talking about right now: owner, editor, and viewer. There are two ways to start setting up access rules for a document. The first is to give all users access to everything by default, and then add rules to restrict access to specific tables, columns, or rows. This is the more common approach, hence why we have these default rules that allow everything for owner editor. Typically, that's the way we've demonstrated in past webinars. So today's webinar, we're going to go with method 2. The second option is to lock down the document completely, so non-owners, so editors and viewers, have no access by default, and then you grant access to specific tables, columns, or rows as needed. The right approach really depends on the sensitivity of your data. If you add a new table and forget to add rules, method 1 would give all users access to that table by default, which might not be a problem for non-sensitive data, but it could be risky for sensitive data. Since this document contains sensitive payroll information, it's safer to lock down access by default and then grant access selectively. That way, if you forget to set rules for a new table, the sensitive data remains protected until access is intentionally granted. Default rules cannot be modified, so if you try and click on this, I can't edit this, but they can be overridden. Access rules are applied top to bottom, so if we want to override one of these rules, we just need to add a rule above it. We just click this plus icon, it adds a condition above it. Now, owner should always have full access in your document no matter what. We do not want to change that. And that's already set here in the user.access in editor owner rule. Owner has full permissions. So we don't need to change anything there. We do need to change access for editors and viewers. And so we can add another condition that follows the same formatting. So user.access. Now this like format user dot is looking up something about the logged in user. It's a user attribute. So we're looking at the logged in user's access. And if it's either editor or viewer, then we want to deny all permissions. And so we just deny all. And because these are, again, assigned top to bottom, this initially just no access for editor viewer, no matter what these other rules say. Then we come to the next rule, and it grants all access to editor and owner. Well, editor's already been restricted, so we forget about them. Owner still needs permissions assigned. So here we go. We've got all permissions. Viewer, again, already been denied everything, so nothing applies. And then finally, anyone who doesn't fit those is denied as well. I'm going to go ahead and save. Okay, so now by default, editors, viewers have access to nothing. We're going to go through and grant access table by table shortly. Down here on the bottom, we have special rules. This first rule is incredibly important. By default, editors and owners have all of the same access, including the ability to edit document structure, meaning editors and owners can add and remove columns from tables. They can add and remove widgets. They can also add, modify formulas. Most document owners do not want editors to have these permissions. So if that's the case, you just uncheck this box. And then, of course, save to remove this ability from editors. So again, unchecking this means that editors can no longer change document structure, so adding, removing columns, again, changing page layouts, and most importantly, they cannot modify formulas. These other two special rules not really used very often. You have the option to allow everyone to view access rules. And when I share this example document, when I post the recording, this will be checked because everyone will want to see the access rules we've created. And then the second one allows everyone to copy the entire document, view it in full, in fiddle mode. That, again, super useful when I'm trying to share documents with you all, but not useful for documents with real data. So those options are there if you're trying to share a template with someone or creating a template from existing document you're working with, but generally not useful. And then scrolling up to the top here, we have this little checkbox immediately under default rules. This allows us to automatically add a rule granting owner full access when we add table-specific rules. I recommend checking the box as it saves you steps later. You can also add your own seed rules just by clicking this arrow, and then you can add them here. And we're going to do that in just a minute. Earlier, I said we are going to grant access based on a person's role, location, or region. And in order to do that, we have to connect the Grist user with a record in the people table. So here we've got the people table. We want to be able to look at the person who's logged in and match it to someone here. And we can do that using user attributes. Grist knows who you are based on the email address you use to log in. So we can match that to an email in this table, and then we can find out your role, location, region, etc., and grant access based on these attributes. So let's say I'm Patty Cabbage. I log in. It sees my email and says, oh, here's a match, patty.cabbage@example.com. Now it recognizes that this entire record is associated with me as the user. And so now it knows my name, my role, my location, my store's region, and now we can grant access based on this criteria. So back in access rules, we click add user attribute, and we'll name it at the end. Let me explain how this goes. So what is the attribute we're trying to look up about the logged in user? We want their email. Access rules does try to give suggestions. And so once you type user dot, it's going to tell you all the attributes that are available. So it's going to look up the logged in email of the user. And then we want to match this somewhere in our document. So the table that we want to match it to is the people table, and specifically that email column. So if the user's email matches an email in that table, now we've got this user. And we're just going to name this employee. Oops. And now this is our user attribute, and we can use this in our rules. So one of the people accessing this document is the director of operations. They need access to everything, but they don't need to edit. We can add a default rule granting them read-only access. So down here, I'll click that plus icon to add another condition. And now we're going to use this user attribute in our access rule. So first you start typing because you want to know something about the user logged in. And so we start by typing user. And then we pick the attribute. Well, we just created this new attribute, employee, and that's what we're going to use. Because again, it's looking at the logged in user. It's matching their email here. And then now we know everything in this record is about this user. And so we're going to look at their role. And then down here at the bottom is our director of operations. If their role is director of operations, we want to give them some level of access. Okay. So specifically, again, we want to look at the role column for this employee's record. And if the value in that column is Director of Operations, we want to grant them access. We use double equal sign to look for an equivalent value. It's just Python syntax. And then here we're looking for a specific string in that field. That field is a choice column, and the option we're looking for is Director of Operations. So we make sure to put that in quotes to specify that it is a string value. Something to keep in mind, strings are case sensitive. So make sure that you have the same capitalization. Normally you can just go copy the value and paste it here. And just to limit jumping back and forth, I'm just typing it in. But if you run into issues when you're setting up your access rules, that's a good thing to check, is the spelling and the case sensitivity for these particular strings. And then we want to grant the Director of Operations read-only access by default. Now, because we want them to have access to everything, we can also add a seed rule. So when we're adding table rules, just like the owner is getting full access no matter what, we want to make sure that the director is still getting that read-only access, regardless of the other rules that we type in. Go ahead and save that. Now we need to add back access to our tables one by one, starting with the people table. We will add table rules for the people table. Now these two seed roles that we created have already been added, and they're at the top. So because access rules apply top to bottom, regardless of the new rules that I add, owner is always going to have full access, and Director of Operations is always going to have read access. So let's start with the bottom of the ladder. We have associates and supervisors. These employees should be able to see the names and contact information for their coworkers, but they don't need to have any edit permissions. So we just want to match this location, and if the location matches, we should give them access. Okay, so we're going to start with the bottom again with associates and supervisors. They should see their coworkers' names and contact information, but they should not be able to edit it. So again, we're going to look at someone's role, the person logged in. So we need that user attribute, user.employee. It's going to tell me all of the attributes I can select from. We want to look at their role. But now we're looking at two roles. So if they're associate or they're the supervisor, we want this role to apply. Whereas before we were looking at just the Director of Operations, so we use double equal signs. Well, now we're looking at one or the other. So we use in, and then we use the square brackets to show a list. So if their role is associate or it's supervisor, and then also if their location matches. And so now we're using the and operator. So if their role is associate or supervisor, and that's the role of the logged in user, and the logged in user's location, so again, user.employee, we're looking up information about the logged in person, their location. So again, Patty Cabbage logs in. Her location is 1001 Pineville. If her location matches the location that's in this column, we want to give her read access. And so to look at a record's location in the table, it's rec, that's the record, dot location. So we're looking at the record's location. And if they match, we'll give read-only access. Let me copy paste. I've been having spelling errors today, so there we go. Okay, it does give you errors if something is wrong, so just look through for a spelling error. That's when selecting from the drop down is nice because it corrects all these things for you. Next, we want to give managers and assistant managers access. They should have the same access. If the logged in user's location matches the location for a record in the people table, the manager and assistant manager should have access as well. So managers and assistant managers, again, we want them to have the same access where they can see any employees at their store. Associate and supervisor get read-only access. Assistant manager and manager, we want to give them read, update, create access so that they can update contact information as needed. Now I'll type this whole thing out just for more of a review, but because it's so similar, you can copy paste your conditions to save you this trouble. But for learning, we're covering it all today. Okay. So again, we want to look at the role of the logged in user, user.employee, employee being our user attribute we created, and specifically we want role. And if that is, again, in a list, we're either manager or assistant manager. That's why we're using in with the square brackets. So if your role is manager and assistant or assistant manager, and you as the logged in employee, your location is equivalent to the location in this column, so rec.location, then we're going to give read, update, and create. It's quicker to just go allow all, and then I can click this and change the permission. We're just going to leave delete solely for the owner. Now, finally, we do have district managers, and they should be able to see employees within their region. This bit does get complicated because one of our district managers is assigned to multiple regions. So here we go. Scrolling down, we've got our 3 district managers, and they have this little column here, region assignment, that assigns them to regions. Stores are located within the regions, and so we want them to have access to any stores within that region. The 2 columns that we're going to be looking at is store region, and if this value, for example, Northwest, appears as an assigned region for a district manager, then they should have access. So Riverbanks should have access to any stores or any people records where the store region is Northwest. Again, this one just a little more complicated because region assignment is a reference list. But it's not something we normally cover in webinars, but I wanted to make sure we had it in this recording so people had it as a reference for the future. Okay. So again, starting with our user.employee.role, you're going to get sick of that because it's on almost every access role I've written. Okay, district manager. And again, if this store region, this is a reference column, meaning just one value. If this one value appears in region assignment, which is a list, if it appears in this list, give access. So the record, we're looking at the record value for store region. And if that appears in the employee, the logged in employee, before we were doing role, now we're looking at their region assignment. If the logged in user is a district manager and a person's store region appears in the logged in user's region assignment list, we want to give all access. We're just going to, again, remove the delete access. So let's save these. Access Rules has this View As feature up here in the upper right that allows you to view as another user, so you can confirm your access rules are doing exactly what you want. So let's view as Patty. She has access to this people table. We said that she should only have read-only access, so if she edits it, she gets this error saying that, not error, but a message saying that she's blocked and unable to make that edit. We can log in as Phil. Phil is a manager for the same location. Phil can see everyone's records. Let's see if he can change someone's email. Yep, no error there. So he can update records as needed. Now we'll log in as Hunter Marks. Hunter is the district manager. So he sees people across multiple stores that are within his region assignment. And then finally, we want to confirm that Sierra can see everything. Sierra is the director and should see all stores, all people. And that looks great. And so we can go back to viewing as ourselves. I always recommend, as you're writing your access rules, use the view as feature to just make sure that everything is good, especially as you're getting started. It's much easier to correct your mistakes on these 5 before moving on to the rest of the table, because then you'll probably reuse the same conditions across multiple tables. We've got the people table set up. The next thing we want to do is our payroll table. Okay, so we'll add the payroll table here. And we're going to start with the highest role and then work our way down in this table. We already have our seed rules, granting owner full access and granting the director read-only access to these records. Next, we want to give district managers access. They should only see payroll records for employees in their region. So if the region in this column is one of their assigned regions over here on the people table, because remember, user.employee can pull this information and we can compare it to stuff in the other table. So if the region on the payroll table is listed here, we can give our district managers access. Okay, so user.employee.role. Oops. And if that is district manager, and then again, we're going to jump over to the payroll table. We're looking at this region. So the region for a record, so rec.region, is in the list of assigned regions for this district manager, or the logged in user, I should say. User.employee.region assignment. Then we will give them read-only access. District managers don't need to change the payroll. They are not there day to day. They just need to be able to see it. And now we want to give access to our managers and assistant managers. They should be able to see and edit records for employees at their location. So user.employee.role. And again, we're looking at if they're a manager or an assistant manager. So we've got the in with a list. And again, you would just be copy pasting this. This is tedious otherwise. And then if the record's location, the value in the location column for a record in the payroll table, if that is equivalent to the location that the logged in user is assigned to, then they should get access. So again, user.employee.location. And then we'll give them all, but then remove delete. Okay. Now, any other employee should see their own payroll data, and that is it. They should not see another employee's records at all. And then they should be able to add and edit their records. So it doesn't need to be read-only, but we do need to make sure that they only see their own. So here we have, this is the payroll table. We have the employee column. This is a reference column. Here we go, column type is reference. The key thing to note here is that reference columns don't actually store this label that you're looking at. Right now we see an employee's name. That's not truly what is stored in this column. So it's a little tricky. What's really stored is this row ID. It's a unique ID assigned to a record upon creation. Obviously, that's not useful to look at, and that's why we have this label so we can see the employee's name. But the key thing to know here is that what is truly stored is the ID, and that's what we need to match on. Okay, so we want to look at the logged in user, and we want to look at the record ID for that person. So let me jump back to the people table. Again, we're going to use Patty as the example. Patty logs in. We match her email here, and now we know this entire record is about Patty. A column you don't see is the ID, and that's what we're looking at now because we need to match it to the employee column in the payroll table. Because this column is a reference column pointing back to the people table. I know it's a lot to wrap your head around. Just know if you're trying to match to a record that's being referenced in a reference column, you're probably going to be using ID. And so if there's a match there, we want them to be able to, oops, wrong one. Read, update, and create. Now let's save that. We did, okay, so director of operations should be able to read. If you're a district manager, you get read only for your location. Managers and assistant managers get to read, update, and create for any employees at their location. But if you don't match any of those, and then this rule applies to you. So you only get read, update, create access to your own records. A common use case for access rules is to limit what records users can edit or access using an archive type column. For example, once a record is archived, perhaps you make it read only. We are currently allowing employees to edit their payroll records. That's not a great idea in the long run because you don't want them going back and changing data for past days. We can set it up where employees can edit the current day's payroll record. Once the day is over, then lock them from editing. Managers, again, would still have access. So if employees said, oh my gosh, I entered the wrong amount, and a manager could go back and make the change. So the way to do this is actually using a toggle type column. So back here on the payroll table, we're going to add a new column with the type toggle. We're going to call this lock. Basically, we want to lock columns that are not today's records. So we have this date column over here on the left. And basically, if this column is not containing today's date, the exclamation point equals means does not equal in Python syntax. And then today is a function that returns the current date. So if that value is not equal to today's date, they should not have access. When I was testing this, I was running into issues with when a new record is created because my date column is actually a trigger formula column that generates the current date. What I found would be useful is to actually even check that the date exists. So if there is a value in the date column and that date is not equal to today, then this formula would return true. This just helps account for when you're creating new records. So I didn't want to just throw that bit on there without explaining that I had done some troubleshooting that led to this. But sometimes it's just useful to say, oh, if this value exists and matches this criteria, then return true. So now if I scroll down to the bottom and I add a new record, I'll do another one for Patty. These two are both today's date, and they're not locked. So now we can write access rules based on that value. And then now we need to modify our existing access rule to now account for that lock. because the lock is just a column if we don't actually create rules for it. Okay, so I'm going to actually add a new rule above this. One of the questions that was asked in registration was about the order of access rules. Do they apply top to bottom? Should we apply more specific rules first and the more general ones after that? And I said yes. And here's an example of where we're going to do that. So we can add a rule above this one that's more specific so that this more specific one applies first. We're still going to use this condition, but now we're also going to look at the value in that lock column. So if rec, that's looking at the records value in the lock column, if that is true, then we want to make that column, or sorry, that record read only to the employee. So then that would apply first, which means that this next one, where it's more general, would apply any other time. So if the lock is true, meaning checked, that is a read-only record, no matter what. But any other situation, read, update, create. The reason you do it this way, again, in testing, if you tried to do this as false and then set this one, that record creation step gets a little weird. Again, because I've got these formulas happening, when a record is created, they're all kind of going at the same time. And so you don't know what order it's happening. It's kind of all concurrent. And so this says we know that's only going to be true if there is a date value and that date value is not today. So we've kind of already accounted for that. So we're just going to set that as our read only. And then the more general one, we want them to be able to read, update, create, especially when a record is created. And so we can restrict it in that order. Okay, click save. So now if I view as Patty, and I go over to my payroll table, Patty only sees her payroll records. If she tries to change this record from 12/31, we get this message. But if she tries to change one from today, she can change that successfully. Now, it would be useful, so if she's trying to change an old day's record, maybe she's not realizing she's looking at an old day's record and sees this message, she might be confused. We can actually add a little memo that tells us what the situation is. We can give them a little note when that pop-up occurs. The other thing I want to do is hide this lock column. She doesn't need to see that. She doesn't need to know that we have a lock on some of these. Okay, so let me go back to access rules. The first thing I said I wanted to do was add a little memo when an employee tries to edit a locked record. So to add a memo, you just click this little message icon, and then you can type in your message, and that's what will now pop up if she tries to make that change again. The other thing I wanted to do was hide the lock column. So to add column rules, you just click the three-dot icon, add a column rule. Again, it adds those seed rules for you. You select the column. I want to hide the lock column. And I'm actually going to delete the director of operations role that's here because they don't need to see it either. I only need this column available to owner, and then everyone else I'm going to deny permissions to. Go ahead and save. And now if I view as Patty, jump over the payroll table. If she tries to change this previous one, now it shows my little message. So she has a good sense, oh, I just edited the wrong one, but she can still go and edit today's record. And then now if I scroll over, she does not see that lock column because we added a column rule to hide it. Now if I log in as Phil, Phil should see all of his employees. Check, fantastic. Hunter should see employees at all of his stores in the region. Two regions, looks good. And then Sierra is the director, should see everything. And that looks great. Moving through, let's go back to our access rules. We had that rates table. Let me show that to you again. And this shows like changes in rates. So Patty last year was making $13 an hour. This year she's making $14 an hour. Similar to payroll, she really should not see other people's rates. So we can go ahead and add table rules for rates. And first, we want employees to see their own rates listed. And this is just like before. We have this employee column. It is a reference column, and reference columns store the ID. So we want to know the ID of the person logged in. And then we compare that to the value stored in the employee column for a record. And if they match, we'll give them read-only access. Next, we want managers and assistant managers to be able to add and update rates for their own employees. I'm going to actually add this below user.employee.id equals rec.id because we still don't want managers and assistant managers to be able to update their own rates either. And so now we're putting it below this so that one applies first, but the managers and assistant managers can still update the other employees. So if the role is manager, oops, I'm just going to copy and paste this part because I don't want to spell it wrong. So if your role is manager or assistant manager, and the value in the location column matches the logged in user's location, then we will give them read, update, create access. Again, manager, like a manager still wouldn't be able to edit their own record because this rule, oops, this rule would apply first. But they would be able to update anyone else's. Okay, so now we've given manager and assistant manager ability to read, update, and create rates for their own employees. And then finally, district managers. They just need to be able to see rates for people in their regions, but they don't need to edit. So and then as we've seen previously, if that region that's listed for the record appears in the region assignment list for the logged in user, then we give them read-only access. Again, these are all rules we've seen before a few times. And last but not least, we do have this locations table and this regions table. These are going to be much easier for us to write conditions for. We want people to have access to that information. They don't need to edit it. They just need to be able to read it, and everyone can see it and read it. So much easier ones here. So we'll add a locations table, rules. Owner has access to everything. This director of operations role, we can actually delete it because the director is going to be included in this everyone else rule. We're just going to give everyone read access to the locations table. And then finally, we're going to do the same thing for the regions table. Leave the owner rule. And then the director of access rule, again, is just going to be in this everyone else rule, so I don't need both. And then I'll go ahead and save, and then I can log in as Patty. We can look at rates. So Patty only sees her own rates. We hadn't reviewed that yet. If I look at, well, let's check. She's got access to locations and regions. Phil is the manager, so he should be able to see rates for everyone at his location. Looks great, but also has access to location and regions. Hunter, district manager, should have access to anyone in his region. Check, looks great, also has access to the regions and locations table. And then finally, Sierra, who, remember, we deleted the director rule from the region and location table. So it's just everyone. Sierra still has access, even though we had deleted that, because, again, it fell under the everyone else rule. And Sierra can see everyone's rates as well. So the last thing I want to point out here is this payroll overview page. We didn't actually assign any rules for this page. This is made up of some summary tables. Sierra is the director, and we set that default rule where the director will have read access to anything, but we never set any other rules for this table. So by default, she has read-only access. But Phil, who is a manager, not a director, doesn't see that at all in his options. That payroll overview, not available. And we never set rules for it. And that's why, because we go back to access rules to show this. Because no table rules were specifically set, these default rules applied. So only the director had read access. Myself as the owner has full permissions, but anyone else can't view that stuff. If I go to add table rules, I can add table rules for these different summary tables if I needed to give other people access. But again, by default, because we locked everything down, if no other rules exist, no one else can view it. As you're working through access rules, please post to our community forum with questions. We are more than happy to help. We've had quite a few good questions on there, so feel free to also search our community. Up here at the top, you can search access rules, and you'll see all the different things. You can click more. Oops. And you can see anywhere that access rules has been mentioned. If you're looking for help with access rules and a reference list, there's some good questions from that where we've answered. But definitely post there if you have any questions. The first question was, can we host and link Grist data to an M365 tenant? I wasn't quite sure what you meant by this one. Grist can be configured to MS ADFS or MS Intra for single sign-on. If you need more assistance in that, please post to our community forum. I'll share a link right away, and just post to our community forum, and our dev team jumps in there and they'll be able to give more of an answer on that. They were able to get that answer for me. And so if you just want to be more clear onto what the M365 tenant is, we can get you a better answer. Thank you so much for joining. And we will see you next month. Again, next month is going to be modifying the invoice custom widget. So we'll be looking at modifying some code, changing some colors, who knows what else at this point, but it should be a good one, especially if you are interested in the invoice custom widget, but just want to make it more custom to you.